On the 1st of September 1939, when German forces crossed the Polish border, Europe entered a period in which every moral boundary was crushed. Just over 2 weeks later, the Soviet Union advanced from the east. A country was split in two, a society was pushed into chaos, and millions of people suddenly became subjects whose fate would be decided by the occupying forces. In the area controlled by Germany, a new administrative apparatus was created, but what truly emerged was a tightly controlled system in which every village and every street was placed under the eyes of the police and the SS. The eastern part, after being annexed by the Soviet Union, also fell into German hands in the summer of 1941. From that point on, all of Poland became a testing ground for the harshest policies Berlin had ever issued. Meanwhile, the map of Europe changed color at a frightening pace. Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Yugoslavia, and Greece fell one after another. By the autumn of 1941, almost the entire continent was in the hands of the German army. And at the center of that vast occupied territory, a structure quietly took shape. Endless railway tracks, empty brick buildings, and steel fences cutting into the grey sky. No one knew that from those early steps, one place would become a symbol of the brutality of the 20th century. A place whose name alone is enough to send a chill down the spine. Auschwitz-Birkenau. The birth and structure of Auschwitz. Auschwitz was not an unexpected creation. It was the final point of a system built by Germany as early as 1933, when Hitler began gathering those considered unwanted elements into detention camps. Political opponents, Jews, and social groups viewed as unsuitable for the new order. At first, these places existed only to isolate, but year after year, they gradually became instruments used to eliminate groups the regime saw as threats. When the war broke out in 1939, the scale of violence expanded alongside the advances of the German army. Mass arrests and forced relocations caused the old camps to become overcrowded. Berlin needed a larger facility, something that could be controlled more tightly and operated according to the logic of a totalitarian state apparatus. From this, Auschwitz was established in the middle of 1940. It was an official institution under the administration of the SS Main Economic and Administrative Office, the unit responsible for all camps across the territories controlled by Germany. At the same time, the RSHA handled the creation of lists, the organization of arrests, and the coordination of the flow of people sent into the camp. These two institutions were linked together and formed the backbone of the entire system. At first, the camp was built to handle the overcrowding of Polish prisoners. But within a short time, its purpose changed. Starting in 1942, Auschwitz became the center of the plan to eliminate Jews on a continental scale. This transformation did not unfold in a single night. It appeared through each new railway line, each expanded barrack area, and each wave of additional SS personnel brought in to support a goal that grew darker with every month. The SS forces here held total authority, guarding the gates, managing operations, supervising labor, and directing every internal function. At first, they were mostly German, but later they were reinforced by people of German origin from many different regions. In total, about 8,000 SS personnel served during the entire existence of the camp. For them, a nod or a command was enough to determine the fate of thousands of human beings. Auschwitz quickly became a symbol of the Holocaust because its level of organization and scale surpassed every other camp. This was where the state apparatus, the security forces, and the military merged into a single functioning machine with only one objective: to remove a group of people from society in the most absolute way the 20th century had ever witnessed. Auschwitz and the grinding machine. Life inside Auschwitz was not existence. It was a slow erosion in which every passing hour could end with the collapse of a human being. The meager food was the first step in a chain of conditions that pushed prisoners toward exhaustion. At noon, they were given 1 liter of thin soup, carried in large wooden containers brought to each row of barracks. Bowls and spoons had to always hang at the waist. Losing either one meant having no way to receive a portion. The evening meal was hard bread, sometimes with a small piece of fat, cheese, or meat so tiny it was barely recognizable. Those who were weaker could not finish it, but they had no other choice. Survival depended on maintaining the minimum strength needed for the next day. After each work shift, prisoners had to line up and return to the barracks. If someone collapsed during the day, the remaining prisoners had to carry the body to the collection point. This task was not an honor or a responsibility. It was a rule, and anyone who disobeyed it faced trouble immediately. In 1942, the number of deaths from hunger and exhaustion rose to the point that it directly affected Germany's demand for forced labor. From then on, rations were adjusted to keep prisoners alive longer. But the reason had nothing to do with humanity. Jewish prisoners and Soviet prisoners of war did not receive these adjustments. In administrative documents, they were placed in the category of not needing preservation of labor power, meaning they were still left to deteriorate naturally. The labor system was the core of life inside the camp. Each day began before dawn. Roll call lasted in the freezing cold, sometimes for hours if someone was missing. Anyone unable to stand was pulled aside, and those around them were forced to remain still regardless of rain or snow. By the time work began, most prisoners had already lost half of their strength. Throughout that period, the greatest fear was not hunger but the awareness that each day was only a test of whether one had enough strength to survive. In Auschwitz, even making it to the next morning was impossible to predict. The harsh conditions were not only meant as punishment, they were designed to wear each person down, leaving them unable to resist, unable to return to the life they once knew, and unable to recognize their own sense of self. The expansion of the camp and the surge of prisoners. The swelling of Auschwitz was not spontaneous. It originated from a major turning point in the war. On the 22nd of June 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union. Within only a few weeks, hundreds of thousands of Soviet prisoners of war were captured, and the German camp system fell into a level of overcrowding it had never experienced before. From that moment, the flow of people pushed into Auschwitz increased at an exponential rate. This did not only reflect Germany's demand for forced labor, but also revealed the ideology Hitler believed in. Jews were considered a biological threat, while the Soviet Union was seen as a threat to European civilization. In that logic, destroying one group of people also weakened the main enemy. Within a year, the number of prisoners in Auschwitz rose from around 700 to more than 11,000. Their composition extended far beyond the original scope. Poles, Jews, exhausted Soviet prisoners of war, Roma, Slavs from across Eastern Europe, and many groups considered inferior were brought to the camp. The list did not only grow longer, but also expanded according to Berlin's goal of reshaping the population of Europe in a way that served the interests of the Reich. To cope with this surge of people, Germany began constructing Auschwitz II, Birkenau, in October 1941. This area had once been farmland, but in a short period of time, it turned into a vast construction site. Tens of thousands of prisoners were forced to work in the Polish winter, where temperatures often fell below 0 degrees Celsius. They worked in freezing mud, without proper shoes and without enough clothing to stay warm. Many collapsed because of exhaustion, cold, or being beaten by guards for working slowly. Those who remained continued building rows of wooden barracks, barbed wire fences, and internal roads to prepare for an even larger influx of people. Birkenau was designed to hold more than 30,000 prisoners, but the actual number later became much higher. The purpose of this expansion was entirely clear. It was to receive, sort, and process the flow of people brought in by trains from across Europe. To serve that purpose, Germany built 4 large gas chambers, designed for maximum capacity and operated through a strict procedure. All of this revealed a cold reality. Auschwitz was originally a detention camp, but in just over a year, it became the largest center of destruction created during the Second World War. The flow of people entering the camp did not decrease over time, but increased after every military campaign. And the more it expanded, the more Auschwitz resembled a gigantic machine in which every component, every barrack, every railway track, every SS unit, and every processing facility operated to serve a single purpose: restructuring the area around the camp. The expansion of Auschwitz did not take place only inside the barbed wire fences. It spread across the surrounding region, creating an area that was completely reshaped according to the needs of the occupying apparatus. From the early 1942 to 1941, residents of the town of Auschwitz and 8 nearby villages were forced to leave their homes. The Jewish population, which made up about 60% of the town, was placed into a ghetto before being deported farther away. More than 1,200 houses were demolished, leaving an empty landscape ready for the plans of the SS. This empty space was quickly filled with structures serving the camp: warehouses, mechanical workshops, repair zones, administrative offices, and transportation routes for goods. Places that had once been villages and fields became technical zones where SS personnel moved, gathered supplies, and prepared for the trains that arrived with people every day. It was not only the camp infrastructure that changed. The SS also built residential areas for officers, many of whom lived with their families right next to the detention zone. These houses had gardens and amenities and stood only a few hundred meters from the place where prisoners struggled to survive each day. This contrast reflected the darkest aspect of the system: a normal world existing directly beside a world stripped of all human dignity. Alongside this, Germany's war economy intensified. Old Polish factories were seized, repaired, or replaced with new industrial facilities serving the Reich directly. One of these was the massive chemical plant of IG Farben, where more than 11,000 forced laborers, mainly Poles, Russians, and French, worked in a state of exhaustion. Auschwitz III Monowitz was created specifically to serve this factory. The location of Auschwitz played an important role. Positioned in the center of Europe, the camp connected easily with the railway network from most occupied countries. This allowed Germany to deport people from nearly the entire continent, from Paris to Amsterdam, from Salonika to Bratislava, from Krakow to Budapest. And each train that arrived meant that the fate of the area around the camp was shaped even more deeply by that system. Auschwitz was not only a camp, it was a territory completely transformed to serve a system. Its population was erased from the map, its homes were torn down, its infrastructure was rebuilt to operate smoothly. And every change served one purpose alone: to turn the entire region into the operating foundation of one of the most ruthless machines of the 20th century. Structure of the 3 parts of the Auschwitz complex. The Auschwitz complex was not a single camp. It was a 3-tier system, each tier holding its own function and together forming a giant machine. Auschwitz I was the original camp. It had once been the barracks of the Polish army, but under the SS it was transformed into the administrative center of the entire system. The rows of brick buildings, the electric fences, and the roll call square became the place that controlled between 12,000 and 20,000 prisoners. Every major decision, from selecting prisoners to issuing labor regulations, was sent out from this place. A few kilometers away was Auschwitz II, Birkenau, an expanded version whose scale surpassed every other camp in Europe. Local residents were expelled and houses were demolished to make room for hundreds of barracks. Birkenau quickly became the largest extermination center of Nazi Germany, with 4 gas chambers and crematoria operating continuously. By 1944, more than 90,000 people were held there at the same time. Birkenau was the darkest part of the entire system, where the railway tracks ended and where the fate of most people brought there ended in silence. The third part, Auschwitz III, Monowitz, appeared in 1942. It was not a purely detention camp, but a labor camp linked to the chemical and synthetic rubber plant of IG Farben. The barracks stood next to the industrial zone, where many people were forced to work to exhaustion to serve the German war economy. In 1944, Monowitz held more than 11,000 people, most of them forced laborers working under brutal conditions. The 3 parts of Auschwitz were connected by railways, by the SS staff, and by a unified command system. Auschwitz I was the brain, Birkenau was the place where the darkest mission was carried out, and Monowitz was the economic arm. Together, they formed a complete network in which every part contributed to the same objective: exploiting, controlling, and eliminating human beings in a systematic way never seen before in history. Final solution and the destruction process. At the beginning of 1942, the German leadership agreed to implement a plan called the Final Solution, with the goal of eliminating the entire Jewish community in Europe. Auschwitz, with its central location and enormous receiving capacity, quickly became a key point of this plan. From that moment, the function of the camp changed completely, from a place of detention to a center that processed incoming people on an unprecedented scale. When the trains arrived at Birkenau, the prisoners were taken down directly onto the railway tracks. The SS carried out the selection immediately. The group still capable of labor was sent to one side. Their hair was shaved, their numbers were tattooed, and they were taken into the barracks to work. The weaker group, the elderly, pregnant women, and children, were separated without any administrative procedure. In SS documents, they were classified as not fit for labor, which meant they were sent directly to the gas chambers. To avoid chaos, the SS guards announced that it was a bathing area or a disinfection room. When the doors were closed, they released Zyklon B, a chemical originally used to kill insects, through openings in the ceiling. Outside, the guards waited until every sound had stopped before opening the doors. The next task belonged to the Sonderkommando, the prisoners forced to clean the area and prepare it for the next group. It was a task no one could escape, because after a short period they were usually replaced in order to erase evidence. By 1944, the processing rate at Auschwitz reached its highest point. During the peak months, especially when Germany deported the Jews of Hungary, an estimated 20,000 people died each day in the entire camp system. This number not only reflects the scale, but also shows the level of operation of a machine designed to work in a closed and uninterrupted cycle. The scene at Birkenau during this period is described in many documents. The railway tracks constantly receiving new arrivals, the chimneys continuously releasing grey smoke, and the entire camp covered by the sharp smell of chemicals, coal, and despair. No other place in the Second World War reached such a scale. Auschwitz, once a detention camp, had become the center for carrying out the Final Solution. It was not merely a location. It was the place where extreme ideology, administrative machinery, and technical knowledge were turned into tools to end the existence of millions of people. Auschwitz and the Nights of Collapse. Living conditions in Auschwitz did not only leave prisoners starved and exhausted, they also destroyed the entire human environment by turning the place of living into a space where no rest was possible, no recovery was possible, and nothing could be called a home in any sense. The barracks that were originally designed to hold a few hundred people were packed with twice or even 3 times that number, making the space so crowded that prisoners could only lie on their sides to save room. Many rows of buildings did not have real beds. Instead, there were rough wooden shelves stacked in tiers, where prisoners crowded together like goods. Other places had only a layer of damp straw on the cold ground, spreading musty smells and attracting rats and insects. In the Polish winter, the cold pierced through wooden walls, through thin clothing, and into every breath. The stove inside the barrack was too weak, warming only the air near its opening, while most prisoners curled up in the darkness throughout the night. The harshness did not stop at the sleeping area. Sanitation almost did not exist. The toilet was a long cement bench, where hundreds of people had to use it together in the few minutes allowed each morning. Clean water was always lacking. Skin diseases, scabies, typhus, and infections spread quickly because there was no medicine and no way to isolate the sick. Many people collapsed within weeks, to the point that they no longer recognized themselves when looking at their reflection in a bucket of water. Every morning the alarm sounded before daylight, forcing prisoners to leave the barrack immediately. No one had time to recover or to rest for even one more minute. Those too weak to stand on their own had to be pulled to the door by others, because if they were left behind, they would be marked as no longer capable of survival. Even before the workday began, most were already shaking from the cold and from bodies with no reserves left. After the long workday, prisoners returned with no energy remaining, but the barrack did not bring safety or peace. It was only a place to wait for the next day, a day when the body had to endure cold, filth, overcrowding, and the decay of the spirit. Every night someone collapsed in their sleep, and the person next to them was forced to pull their body outside before the barrack was inspected. complex network, and forced labor. In addition, Auschwitz was not only the three main camps. From 1942 to 1944, this system expanded into a vast network with 47 subcamps and labor detachments spread across the Upper Silesia region. These subcamps served as sources of forced labor for mines, factories, farms, and industrial facilities supporting the war effort. All of it was located inside a completely isolated area called the Zone of Interest, a region of more than 40 square kilometers, equivalent to 5,600 football fields. Anyone who entered this area fell under the absolute control of the SS. Barbed wire fences and guard towers covered the entire network, prohibiting all contact with the outside world. Within this network, the brutality of forced labor appeared most clearly during roll call. Many prisoners collapsed from exhaustion on the cold ground, and such collapse only made the roll call last longer, adding another trial for those still standing. The work shift often lasted more than 11 hours. Prisoners were assigned to factories producing war components, repair workshops, construction sites expanding the camp, and especially industrial facilities owned by private companies such as Bayer or IG Farben. Auschwitz III. Monowitz was the camp that directly served this plant. There, many people collapsed during their shift because of heavy labor and exposure to chemicals. Food during work was only thin soup with potatoes or flour. Most prisoners ate just to keep breathing, not to restore strength. Hunger became a permanent condition, and weakness was something everyone could see in the person next to them. Women in the camp often worked sorting clothes and belongings taken from newly arrived people. Every item had value to the SS, and the sorting process was strictly supervised. Inside those storage buildings, countless possessions of hundreds of thousands of people who disappeared from life were gathered, standing as the only trace of journeys that would never return. Throughout this entire system, forced labor was not only a way to extract strength, it was a rhythm of operation that served both the German war economy and the goal of leaving prisoners so exhausted that they could no longer think or resist. Every workday in the Auschwitz network was one step closer to the physical limits of the human body, limits that most prisoners never surpassed. Resistance and rescue. In the midst of a system designed to wear down every trace of will, resistance in Auschwitz still existed. It was not made of large-scale uprisings, but of quiet actions born from the need to hold on to the smallest fragment of human dignity. The first resistance groups appeared in the second half of 1940, mainly political prisoners from Poland, a group that was organized and capable of secret communication. They wrote notes, hid letters, exchanged information, and tried every possible way to warn the outside world about what was happening inside the camp. From 1942 to 1943, prisoners of other nationalities also formed their own networks, creating an underground system that stretched across the barracks. Saving others in silence was their main goal. A pair of shoes, a hidden piece of bread, a slightly better position in a work detail. These small things could decide whether a person survived in the camp. Many prisoners gave up their own small portions to help someone else overcome exhaustion. These acts could not break the camp, but they preserved something the SS always tried to extinguish: the ability to care for another person. The strongest act of resistance occurred on the 7th of October, 1944. A group from the Sonderkommando, the prisoners forced to work near the gas chamber area, organized an uprising. They attacked SS guards, set off explosives, and destroyed a crematorium. The effort could not change the fate of the camp, but it proved that even those at the lowest level of the system still held the will to resist the machine that was crushing them. Resistance was not limited to the inside. Outside the camp, Polish residents risked their lives to help prisoners. They hid letters, provided medicine, food, and even organized escapes. These actions were severely punished, and anyone caught paid a very high price, yet they continued. An important part of the resistance was sending information to the world. Secret reports, diagrams of the gas chamber facilities, and testimonies from escapees crossed borders and reached the Allies. Because of that, Auschwitz was no longer the absolute secret the SS intended it to be. In a place where each day was a test of survival, standing against the system, even through the smallest actions, was already an extraordinary achievement. The resistance in Auschwitz did not overthrow the camp, but it preserved something the occupying machine could not erase: the courage of human beings, even when facing the most desperate circumstances. Evil facilities and torture. At first, Auschwitz was put into operation. At that time, there were only the first 728 Polish political prisoners brought into the camp. In the beginning, this place was considered a camp for those labeled as dangerous: officers, intellectuals, local leaders, and people who were seen as capable of organizing resistance. But only a short time later, the composition of the prisoners expanded rapidly. German guards brought in Roma people, Soviet prisoners of war, and from 1,942 Jewish people deported on a massive scale. The selection process began the moment prisoners stepped through the gate. SS doctors waited to decide who was strong enough to work and who was considered no longer able to serve. Those who still had strength were sent to the barracks and began the harsh cycle of labor. But for weaker groups, the elderly, pregnant women, and children, the decision was often made within seconds. The most brutal structure in Auschwitz I was Block 11, the punishment area. This was where prisoners were taken for reasons that sometimes were only for standing in the wrong place, hiding an extra piece of bread, or being too exhausted to follow orders. Block 11 contained cells without light, standing cells only a few dozen centimeters wide, and devices used to force prisoners to hang suspended for hours. Many who entered Block 11 left only by transport back to Birkenau, where they would be placed on the list of those no longer capable of survival. Next to Block 11 was Block 10, where inhumane medical experiments took place. Some SS doctors tested sterilization methods on Jewish women and men using drugs, X-rays, and crude surgery. Many people, after enduring these procedures, were no longer able to recover and were moved to the group considered unfit for labor. Among the most haunting figures in Block 10 was Josef Mengele, who was responsible for research on twins, congenital deformities, and genetic traits. He collected data by observing, measuring, and then dissecting the bodies of victims to compare. Those who entered his room rarely had the chance to return to the barracks. Auschwitz did not only have gas chambers and crematoria. It was also a dense structure of cells, experimental areas, and punishment zones created to strengthen the power of the system. The fear in Auschwitz did not lie only in death, but in what happened before it. The physical collapse, the loss of dignity, and the sense that any small mistake could make someone disappear from the camp. Statistical records and historical evidence. The numbers about Auschwitz are not emotional estimates. They come from the records of the SS itself, the documents of the Nuremberg trials, the reports of the Sonderkommando, and the research of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum. Every number is evidence that cannot be denied. According to official statistics, at least 1.3 million people were brought to Auschwitz during the time the camp operated. Among them, only about 400,000 were registered, meaning they were given prisoner numbers, placed in barracks, and forced to work. The group included about 200,000 Jews, 150,000 Poles, 23,000 Roma, 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war, and more than 25,000 people from other categories. More than half of those who were registered did not survive. They died from starvation, exhaustion, disease, punishment, or in medical experiments. About 200,000 people were transferred to other camps, and many of them died in the places where they were sent. By January 1945, when the Red Army approached, only about 7,000 people remained alive in the camp. Most of them no longer had the strength to stand, speak, or move on their own. The barracks, when opened, were filled with the sick, the exhausted, and those waiting for a different end. But the largest number does not appear in the registration records. About 1.1 million Jews were brought to Auschwitz on trains from across Europe, and most of them were never recorded on any list. They were taken directly from the railway platform to the processing area. That is why the number of Jews killed in Auschwitz is overwhelmingly higher than that of other groups. Their origins stretched across the continent. Hungary accounted for the largest number, with about 430,000 people brought to the camp in just a few months of 1,944. Poland was second with about 300,000. Next came people from France, the Netherlands, Greece, Italy, Slovakia, Belgium, and many other countries. A large part of them lost their lives as soon as they stepped onto the railway platform. All of these numbers are proven through documents, photographs, testimonies, and archaeology. None of the numbers are guesses. Each number is evidence of a system that operated with cold precision, and a reminder that Auschwitz is not a retold story, it is historical truth supported by complete witnesses and records. The death marches and liberation. From the end of 1944, Germany understood that the war was slipping out of control. As Soviet forces approached Auschwitz, the SS began destroying evidence. The gas chambers were blown up, the crematoria were dismantled, and the records were burned. All of it was meant to erase the traces of what had taken place during 4 years of operation. An important decision was made to move prisoners deeper into German territory. Some SS officers wanted to eliminate all the remaining people, but the command chose to force them to walk in winter conditions in order to move the labor force and hide the truth. The order was issued in the middle days of January 1945. More than 60,000 prisoners were forced to leave the camp in temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius. They wore thin clothing and torn shoes, and many were already weakened before they stepped out of the camp gate. The long columns moved slowly along icy roads. Anyone who fell and could not stand up again was left by the roadside. Some were shot on the spot by the guards. The others were forced to keep walking, hearing gunshots behind them but not allowed to turn back. These movements were called death marches, not because they were symbolic, but because they took the lives of about 15,000 people in just a few short weeks. The cold, hunger, exhaustion, and the cruelty of the escorting forces prevented many from surviving until they reached the gathering points. Meanwhile, in Auschwitz, the number of people left was only about 7,000, most of them lying in the infirmary or on the barrack floors, too weak to join the march. When Soviet troops entered the camp on the 27th of January 1945, they found these people in extreme exhaustion. The remaining barracks were filled with broken bunk frames, torn clothing, and personal belongings abandoned in haste before the marching columns left. The Soviet army also found the storage facilities containing the possessions of prisoners. Hundreds of thousands of sets of clothing, tens of thousands of pairs of shoes, and nearly 7 tons of cut hair, all of which were undeniable evidence of what had happened inside the camp. January 27 became International Holocaust Remembrance Day because it marked the moment when the world first witnessed the full consequences of a system of destruction operated under the cold logic of the Nazi state. Auschwitz was not an ordinary detention camp. It was the center of a system built to erase human beings on a continental scale. Prisoners there came from almost every country in Europe. Jews, Poles, Roma, Soviet prisoners, Czechs, Belarusians, French, Germans, Ukrainians, and many other communities. Each train arriving at the camp carried a group of people torn from their homeland, their families, and ultimately from their own identities. Looking back at the entire picture of Auschwitz, from its formation, expansion, the final solution, forced labor, punishment, resistance, and the death marches, we can clearly see how a state machine could turn administrative offices, the military, and technical institutions into tools used to strip millions of people of their lives and dignity. Auschwitz was not only a part of history, it is a warning about the consequences of absolute power placed in a system built on hatred and discrimination. Thank you for watching this content. If you want to continue exploring other stories from the Second World War, do not forget to leave a comment so I know what you are most interested in. Thank you for staying until the end of the video.